Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink. Episode 31 is brought to you by our incredible local friends in Waggle Golf and Barrel Theory Beer Co. With me, as always, is Joe Smith of The Athletic, bringing you all the insider info on your Minnesota Wild and Gopher hockey. Joe, it's here. It's upon us. Tomorrow is the beginning of training camp. It's wild.
It's not weird. It's wild. Long summer for most people. Felt shorter for me with a newborn, but yeah, like there's not a lot of wild news over the summer. Not a lot of changes. I think that makes more anticipation to kind of get it over with and get to the season right versus all the hype and that stuff over the course of an off season. So I think today or John Hines, the little availability at Tom Reed's with some local media and getting some of the regular questions that we covered a lot of that in the Q&A with me. I had them in the Athletic that ran on Tuesday, but clearly I think they're just ready to get it started. Like I think the more we'll learn is when the practices start, the training camp starts, versus all the conjecture and stuff we can talk about over the summertime. So
yeah,
I think anybody who's a fan of hockey, who covers hockey, is just ready for them to drop the puck and get something for us to talk about this live versus kind of everything else.
Yeah, not nearly as much speculation as we've had to do all summer. There'll still be some speculation, but at least we'll have something we're basing it off of rather than like, all right, we've already talked about this 4 times this summer. How can we talk about it differently? So it's nice. It's going to be real nice. Well, let's kick it off then. We got rundown for everybody. Going to lead off with Keyboard Warriors, a little bit different than usual. Hot take segment. Then we're going to jump in with a quick hit with Joe, myself, and Michael Russo teeing up the kickoff for training camp tomorrow as you listen to this on Wednesday. And then any final thoughts here from the sit down with Hines today, Joe's article, and whatever else we need to tie a bow on before kicking off with the first live action for the big squad. So first here. Keyboard Warriors weekly hot take segment brought to you as always by our great friends at Barrel Theory Beer Company. And we are so close here, Joe. Less than 2 weeks now, I believe. No, maybe it's just over 2 weeks. Math isn't important. I am so excited to get my first fix of Barrel Theory at the X opening night against Dean Evison, hosting the Columbus Blue Jackets. It's just going to be the best. Make sure you check them out. You can get them at section 105, 112, 217, and club level 36. Hot takes here then this week, Joe. First one I know we came across on Twitter from Wheeler saying your top 2 centers should be played with your top 4 wingers. And the top 2 centers that he's alluding to here being Marco Rossi and Joel Eriksson-Ek.
Yeah, I think it was a reflection or a response to, I think, what I wrote in my Q&A with Hines over the weekend was that they're planning on starting Ryan Hartman with Zuccarello and Kaprizov like they had a couple of years ago that worked well. And the idea being that they wanted to split up, that top line they had last year with Ek, Boldy, and Kaprizov and give them some more balance. And, Hartman had a track record with those guys, scored 30-plus goals in 21-22. So there's a thought process in that. And Scott Wheeler, my esteemed colleague we've had on the podcast here before, just thought you should have your top 2 wingers like with your top 2 centers. Like why shuffle it around? And his argument is that Marco Rossi is a better center right now than Ryan Hartman, which you can argue both ways. They're both really different players, different sizes, different skill sets, different experience level. I get his point regarding like you have a young player you want to build for the future versus a veteran player. You kind of know what you already have in him per se and where his ceiling is versus giving the young kid a shot versus having on the third line. I will say that John Hines did indicate that it wasn't just going to be given to Hartman and he plays the entire preseason, and that's going to be game 1 of the lineup. They're going to tinker with it. And he said Marco Rossi will get a shot as well, centering Kaprizov and Zuccarello. And so I understand where he's coming from with that. And I'm all for giving young players, not putting them in a box and saying, hey, you get to play here until whenever. You have to see what these young guys can do. And Marco Rossi, like I wrote in my story a couple of weeks ago, is primed to think he could be a 30-goal scorer. He thinks he's ready for more, and I think he very well could be. But I think Hines' point is they're going to shuffle it around and see who sticks there, and the whole idea is to have more balance in your lineup, and Rossi is a guy who can play on that third line as well. So it is kind of a hot take in that sense, because I think they're going to give Hartman that chance, but I think Rossi will get an opportunity during training camp as well. I don't know what you, Scott, if you're a big Rossi guy, as we all know. So I think you're probably in Wheeler's camp of saying, hey, just give him that number one center and let him roll with it. But a lot of it bases on, not just based on the outside looking in, it's also, hey, how does he mesh with Kaprizov? How do they enjoy playing with them? You want your best player on your team to mesh with their line mates with his center, right? And let's say Kaprizov meshes better, or him and Zuccarello have better reads with Hartman, or they know they just got a better feel for him. Then sometimes you have to go with what chemistry is versus what's on paper the best particular lineup.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for that. I think there is a longer track record of success with Hartman between Kaprizov and Zuccarello. I also think, that the fallout of Hartman has been aggressively overstated, but I thought that Rossi centering Kaprizov and Zuccarello last season in spot starts, I thought it looked good, but I guess my spin on this, I've kind of started to come around to the idea that they might be starting this way because it's a lot easier to flip Hartman off of the first and Rossi onto it than vice versa. It's a way bigger story if Rossi starts camp with those guys and gets sent down to the third line. Whereas, hey, let them come in. Let's see Rossi prove it a little bit, work for it. It's not the end of the world if he starts on the third line. Do I want to see him centering the first line? Personally, yes. But I think you're in a good spot regardless with those two flipping around, as long as we end up with the right assembly of that second line, which I know you and I are very on the same page with, hoping that ends up being boldy and ohgren at some point, not too far in the future. But yeah, I think this is a little bit of chess over checkers with Hines, starting with Hartman there being like, dude, this is yours as long as you can hold on to it. Fight off the young kid. Here you go.
And I think it's similar to what we talked with Mike Russo about in our interview later, is that the Johansson argument too. They're going to probably start Johansson on the second line wing with Ek and Boldy. He had a down year last year, but as opposed to starting ohgren on line two, he had 3 NHL games of experience in his life, and then putting Marcus Johansson in day one of training camp on a third or fourth line. How's that going to make him look or feel about himself? Beginning make everybody earn it. Make Johansson earn it. Make ohgren earn it. Whatever. So I didn't take this comment as anything down on Marco Rossi from John Hines. It's more so of the lines are going to switch from day 1 to day 3 to day 5 to day 7, and fans shouldn't freak the heck out about it, because only thing that matters is game 1. Plus, that always changes between game 1 and game 3. Injuries happen, but I think the matter of fact is that you have multiple options at the center position that maybe years before you didn't have, to where here we are arguing about move your third line center to number 1 center. I think in some years in the Minnesota Wild, they didn't have those options of having 3 guys you could probably play as your number 1 center for the team.
That is true. Yeah. And I mean, fans shouldn't react. They're absolutely going to. That's what we're here for.
That's really fine. I'm happy they're reacting. It's just more so of making sure this is not set in stones and not Ryan Hartman on top line forever. But I think he had a great summer. I have a story on him coming out on Monday about his offseason, and kind of like you said, the demise of Ryan Hartman was greatly exaggerated. He had 21 goals last year. He had a couple suspensions, which were, especially the last one, which was untimely, throwing the stick at the ref allegedly at the end of the season. But there's a lot to like about Ryan Hartman, and to get where they want to go, they need the best version out of him. And I think starting him where he's had some of his best mojo isn't the worst idea in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Next one here for you. Number 1 fantasy pick is cursed.
That is very overrated, having the number 1 overall pick. I had Christian McCaffrey this year, like I'm sure a lot of people did. So I read Kyle Shanahan's comments in preseason, he's fine. If we're a postseason game, he'd be playing game 1. turns out if that was the case, he wouldn't be playing the Super Bowl either. Because we got on the IR just in the first 5 weeks. I'm glad I picked Jordan Mason up off waivers.
That is good.
September, which could be saving my bacon in a sense. But I had Jonathan Taylor a couple of years ago, and he got hurt too. And so and this isn't my own fault because, we get to pick our own draft order based upon certain things like the previous league champions decision on who gets the first. And we end up picking our league draft order based upon how closest to the date and closest to the weight of our baby. And so I got I got the first pick of draft picks, and I picked the number 1 draft pick. Yeah. So I'm like, this is gonna be the year that he stays healthy. Like, I know there was some other guys like CD Lamb, and you could have picked Bryce Hall and could have picked somebody else. Yeah. There were some arguments for other ones, but if you had at the running back position, there are very few locks more than Christian McCaffrey, and it just bit me this time. And I'm hoping that Jordan Mason and hope other guys can step up for me, but that's just it's a tough pill to swallow in week 1, 2, 3 to know he's on IR already.
Yeah, it's not good. It's better now though than the end of the season, I guess. And it's Madden curse, man. He's on the cover. You can never trust it. It's been a crazy year though for I feel like everyone's getting hurt. We're only 2 weeks in, and every week it's there's 7 more guys that have just dropped off. No one is healthy for the Rams. I don't know what's going to happen over there, but it's you know what? Fantasy football is not for the faint of heart. Injuries.
Like the Vikings in preseason, all the injuries that they had, right? And now about their 2-0, and
now they're leading the NFC North.
Got the hottest quarterback in the league right now, and they got Jefferson's healthy and balling. So yeah. But anyways, next time if I get the number 1 overall pick, I'm going to forfeit it and just auto draft, or do something like that. I don't know what the hell to do. But anyway, I probably still got McCaffrey anyways. It would have still been the same thing.
Yeah, probably right. Last one then came on YouTube, which there was a lot of reaction, Joe, to Ben Hankinson talking about the speculative trade of Brock Boeser a year ago. But this response said, Wild clearly wanted to do it, but couldn't make the money work. Hindsight, they should have made the money work and traded their first for that year, because at least then the Wild wouldn't have wasted a pick on Stramel. It's a loaded one.
Yeah, that's a lot. And we're all in hindsight, right? Hindsight, Boeser at the time was going to be traded because he was having a rough year, right? They weren't trading Boeser last year when he was scoring 1 million goals and one of the best stories overall in the league. So yeah, and the Wild were smart to kick the tires and see if they could. You can't always move contracts, the way you want to, and just like they tried to get Line this year and thought they had a deal in place. But obviously the player also has to want to choose to play there if they have the no trade clause. And we all know where Line ended up in Montreal. So I don't think Boeser is going to be coming to the Minnesota Wild anytime soon, unless it's in free agency eventually, because, they're not going to be trading that guy as now that he's on the way up the way he is and where they are in their championship arc, they hope.
Yeah. And for me, honestly, the harder part of the take that I'm still not willing to concede is just the rampant Stramel hate.
Yeah. Well,
give me this season. Let me see what he does with Michigan State. Then we can make some bigger decisions.
Yeah. And again, it's not like he's going to put up fantasy numbers at Michigan State, right? No one's thinking he's going to go in there and be a 25 goal scorer and Hobie Baker candidate. And his year won't be a failure if that doesn't happen. I think if he just has a normal regular year where he's an impact player and not somebody who's played limited minutes and just on the penalty kill and maybe fourth line, if he can play middle six and be a solid contributor, and he can play against power play time, power penalty kill time, and show that power forward type guy he can be, then that's encouraging part of his growth. He made, with the guys that are coming up the middle for the Wilds, they don't need him to be the number 1 center. They can, if he's a really good third line center, then that's going to be very helpful for them down the line the next couple of years. So you have Yurov, you have Eck, you have Marco Rossi, so I just think, and Hartman signed for a couple more years. Like, I just think, perspective is important there. And Charlie Stramel does not equal Brock Boeser, but that doesn't mean that was, just gave it up on him because that pick could have been Gabe Perreault. Would you say the same thing if it was Gabe Perreault and they picked him? I don't know.
Yeah, probably not. That is the big thing that every fan is apparently mad about, that it's not Gabe Perreault, which we'll see how things pan out with him. But awesome. Let's kick it over then to us chatting with Russo. This interview is brought to you by our friends at Waggle Golf. Waggle Golf believes what you wear on the course should reflect your individuality, who you are, where you're from, your hobbies, interests, and passions. All the stuff that makes you, well, you. That's why every design is inspired by the desire to create a piece of apparel that strikes a chord when you see it, that makes you say, wow, that was made for me. Because in a lot of ways, it was. Ready to get your waggle on? Go to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10 at checkout to take 10% off your entire order. All right, here on the eve of training camp, Michael Russo jumping in to help us fill in some of the gaps here. Mike, let's just jump right in. For you, we've been talking all offseason about different storylines that we expect to develop, things that we want to see once training camp hits, once we get into preseason and regular season. What's the biggest unanswered question for you that you're going to be eyeing up going into training camp here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe wrote it in, I think that was his big question in today's John Hines Q&A I'm curious on how the 3 goalie system is going to work, because I think there's no doubt that their plan, since they couldn't trade Philip Gustafsson this offseason, is that they're going to try to get Jesper Wallstedt some games this season. And to do that, normally that wouldn't be such a big issue, but there's 2 big things to me that are going to be, in my mind, problematic. Is one, his development. You don't want him just up here sitting around. I know that they're going to say, well, he's getting a lot of practices with Fleury and Gustafsson. He's working with Freddie Shabbat. But I think the most important thing for a young 22-year-old is getting reps. And so if he's up here, backing up or in the press box at times, I just think it would probably be more beneficial for him getting starts in Iowa. And the other big reason is the dirty secret that every fan knows is their cap space. He makes $925 as a cap hit, so he's on the team, and they can't even afford another extra player. So there's going to be times where even if they want him up here, if they lose a forward, they're gonna have to send him down just to be able to afford a recalled forward. And so when they go on long road trips, I think that's an interesting thing. Like they got a 7-game road trip starting game 3 of the season. 5 of that is really one trip. And they're going to want him on that trip, because that's part of it is going to Florida and being a bonding trip. But if all of a sudden, if like last year where they lost Freddie Gaudreau and Matt Boldy in game 2 of the season in Toronto, if you lose a player, in Winnipeg or St. Louis, those games, you're going to need to send him back to be able to afford it. So I'm just going to be really interested and I get it. They want him to get him games. He is the future. It's time to get him games. But when they made the decision to re-sign Marc-Andre Fleury, and the second they did that, you knew they were going to try to trade Gustafsson. But even at the time, Joe and I talked about it, we knew it wasn't going to be easy to trade Gus. One, he was in the middle of a bad year, and 2, there were a ton of goalies available this offseason and not enough teams. So it didn't shock either of us at all that they couldn't trade Gus. I think they did come close with Columbus in the Patrick Laine trade. I think that was agreed to. I think he was going there, and Patrick wouldn't waive his no trade to come here. But obviously it didn't happen. So what that means is that all year long, we're going to have to see if they're going to either trade Gus again, or if he gets off to a brilliant start, they're not going to want to trade Gus. So I think the 3 goalie system is, to me, the most intriguing thing.
And I think, talked to John Hines the other day, and what struck me is he didn't say, oh, Wallstedt will play just a few games. He's like, he'll expect to push those guys, and whoever plays the best or competing the best will get a chance to play. And so I still think Fleury and Gustafsson have the edge in terms of playing more games, but I think they're going to give him a serious look. If they're going to play this game where they're going to have him on the 3rd goalie, they're not going to want him sitting on the bench. So they're going to give him a serious chance to say, hey, they want to be more comfortable with him, so you can trade Gustafsson in the middle of the year.
Yeah, and to your point, Joe, it's going to be really fascinating how they work this. technically, like if I'm the Wild right now, and I know, I mean, let's be honest, right? Gus is playing game 1, Fleury's playing game 2. I think that's likely. So to me, if I'm the Wild, I start Gus in the minors those first 2 games. And now you're saving, Volstead. Yeah. You start in Volstead. This is going to be the most annoying thing this year, is for me to keep my mind on which goalie I'm talking about. But they're going to, you start him in the minors because there's no reason to waste cap space there. And actually, let's be honest, they're like basically about $20,000 short of being able to afford 2 extra players. So if you do that, you actually could maybe accrue some space. Then what you do is now you go to Winnipeg on the second of a back-to-back, and then St. Louis. Like maybe you don't take Fleury on that trip. Then you call up Volstead, you make him the backup in Winnipeg for game 3, and you make his season debut in St. Louis in game 4. And then most likely, maybe you send him back. You bring Gus and Fleury to just Columbus, save a little more cap space. And then you bring Volstead down to Florida, Philly, Tampa and Pittsburgh. And now you're at least having with the team bonding. He starts maybe one of those. So there's going to be ways to do it. But again, the wear and tear, I know he's only 22 and it's not trust me, we do it. I'm the most out of shape person in the world and I could travel commercial, but he is going to get a lot of airline miles this year, because if you do it that way, you're starting him in the minors, you're bringing him up, then you're sending him back, then you're flying him to Florida. I mean, it's just going to be fascinating how they do it. So I don't know. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah. And going off of that too, Mike, like a lot of questions that came through are about, potential for prospects to make the team. Like, I'm sure that the salary cap is going to have big implications on that, but do you see anyone besides Huznadinov, Ohgren, and Height that are going to be making pushes for spots in the roster?
I mean, Scott, a lot of it has to do with obviously injuries, right? I mean, if they do have some guys that you lose in camp, I think guys like Reese Johnson has a chance. If you need a defenseman, Damon Hunt is close. That's the one thing that I do like about their offseason is they signed a lot of like really quality minor league players that are going to be down in Iowa that you could call up in roster spots. And, if you need them. So like a Johnson is somebody that's been a lot in the NHL, a Devin Shore, people like that. So there are those type of players. I'd love to see Michael Milne at some point get a chance this year. Hunter Haight's going to obviously play in the minors. He's probably not going to make the team right away, but it's going to be interesting because if they want to keep, if Riley Height proves that he deserves to be here again, cap space is not infinite. And so, again, maybe you keep him the first couple games, you send Volstead down. Now you could afford him, but then if you call Volstead up, you can't even afford Height. So it's going to be interesting. So, as John Hines is pretty, I think transparent about in Joe's piece today, they're not insulting anybody's intelligence here, and that's always like, I've covered the league 30 years. You always hear these teams like, oh, it's wide open. Anybody can come to camp. No, it's not. I mean, contracts rule the roost. And so, I feel bad for some of these prospects and minor leaguers that are coming to camp this year because they look at the numbers and they know that there's just no spots available. So I think Ohgren and Huznadinov deserve to be here, but they still got to make the team. And I hope they do.
Speaking of Reese Johnson in a kind of weird way, the season kind of started off on a rough foot last year when Jared Spurgeon, the captain, got hurt last preseason game. That made a big impact on penalty kill, made a big impact on defense. They had pushed Faber. Faber didn't have that year he had, been an even worse season. So I know you sat down with Jared Spurgeon recently, an interesting, fascinating interview with him and his wife. And just what are the biggest things you learned, most fun things you learned too from that?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I'm smiling, Joe. And I don't know when this pod is coming out, so I hesitate to scoop myself, but I got a big Spurgeon story coming out in Thursday's Athletic. And one of the most hilarious things his wife told me is that, and this just shows you what a great captain that Jared Spurgeon is and what a great captain's wife, Danny Spurgeon, is. Like, they do this stuff all the time and we never usually hear about it. Last week, they wanted to get all the two-way guys out of the hotel because they're going to be in a hotel for a month. So they made it an open invitation where some actual NHL guys did come as well. But, it's before the season. They got kids, families. A lot of them didn't come. But all the two-way players, the minor league guys, the guys expected to be in Iowa, the prospects came to their house for dinner. They were told to be there at 4:00. And at the end of the night, when they were all left, Danny Spurgeon goes to Jared, how I really loved Reese Johnson and his wife. And Jared's like, that's the guy that hurt me in training camp last year. And Danny had no clue. And I just thought that was hilarious because that is the person that hurt his shoulder and he missed the first month of the season. But it's just, I think it says this is the type of stuff that kind of drives me. I get it, but it kind of drives me nuts when fans are like, why don't they put the C on Kaprizov? Give it to this guy, that guy. Like Spurgeon's the captain of this team. He does a lot of stuff that we do not see. There's no reason. This is not a Toronto situation where it was just time for Tavares to give it up and give it to the 70 goal scorer in Austin Matthews. Jared Spurgeon should be the captain of this team. He is the captain of this team. Let's see what he does this year. And to your point, Joe, I think we all just because maybe he missed so much time last year and it happened before camp started where he had his first injury, even though it technically was unrelated to the other injuries that cost him the season. We all take for granted of what a huge loss that was for this team. And look, he's obviously not the same player he once was at 34 years old that he was when he made his NHL debut on his 21st birthday. But this is a great hockey player that his impact was felt last year from an even strength standpoint, a power play standpoint, and obviously a penalty kill standpoint. Now, there were some bright spots because of it. Like we might not have seen Brock Faber excel to the point that we all knew that he could be if Jared Spurgeon is in the lineup. But now that Jared's back, it gets Jake Middleton with somebody that he's much more comfortable with and plays better with. And then obviously you got Brodin and Faber together. So I think it's a huge return. I talked to Spurge, as he said the other day, he is feeling 100%. Obviously you don't know until you know, but he is feeling great right now. And so, him being back, Foligno being back, and all the other guys, the Goudreaus, the Zuccarellos that had, that were nicked up for a lot of the year, just to have them healthy is going to be big for this team.
And one of the things you mentioned there, Mike, is one of the bigger things I'm looking for going into the year. Do you sense that it's an open competition right now for who's going to quarterback the first power play unit, or do you have a leaning on how that's going to wrap out?
Yeah, I mean, just reading again Joe's piece today, he talked to John, and John basically made it sound like there's going to be this open competition between Faber and Chisholm to decide who's going to be on that number one unit, and that they're both going to get spotted, and whoever's not on the number one gets the number two. Chisholm was great at times last year on the number one unit. I still would love for Faber there, but I also think that Faber got worn down. Now, obviously, he had the ribs injury, so I mean, it's hard to say that he got worn down. But his game, obviously, as the season went on, I think the major minutes really started to really have an impact on him. Plus the fact that he was playing with broken ribs for 2 months. But if you put him on the number two unit, that really, now you take a third defense pairing guy and Chisholm, you're giving him significant minutes on the number one unit. We all know watching the Wild that on their number one unit, they either score or they play a minute and a half. It lowers Faber's ice time where maybe he could be better on the penalty kill, which is the one area where he struggled last year. And so now if you're taking his ice time from averaging 26 and a half minutes to 24 and a half minutes, by playing him on the number two unit, it actually might make his overall game much more consistent. And so that would be the way that I think that they're going to come out of camp, but we'll see. But the one thing that I thought was pretty interesting in Joe's piece today is it sure sounds like it is just Chisholm and Faber. It's going to be, one on the top unit, one on the other unit, and that Spurgeon probably will be a power play guy only if there's an injury or there's an ice time issue or something's going on in the game, which also could be good because now Spurgeon can really think about just even strength and really making their penalty kill better. So as much as I usually like Spurgeon on the power play, I think he's a really good power play guy, especially getting the puck up the ice and shooting pucks from that right circle. It probably would be better for the team if you just rely on those two defensemen and have four forwards on each of the units.
And you look at Faber, he couldn't have done a better rookie year. I know he didn't win the Calder Trophy, but it's beyond expectations. He's gotten paid now. He's here long-term. You were with him in Vegas for the NHL Player Tour, and talked to a bunch of guys too about like the quote unquote sophomore slump we've written about a million times. Yeah. I don't know if it's real or not, but I guess coming up a guy who played 82 games, including with broken ribs. I'm curious what his thoughts are going into the season, and what do you expect from him? If there's guys that have insight on like, should we expect maybe not to have the same year because of just adjustments from their teams make too?
Well, yeah, I'm going to be doing a big story on that at some point in training camp. And I talked to Nathan McKinnon about it. I talked to Quinn Hughes about it, who both obviously had unbelievable rookie years. And I talked to Connor Bedard about it, who obviously we all know won the rookie of the year. And, McKinnon is the one guy there, and Ashley Hughes, that did have sort of, lapses in their second season. And the one thing that McKinnon definitely told me is that, you almost lose your fear factor in year two. The first year, first of all, nobody knows you, even though everybody knew Nathan McKinnon. But you go into that year and you're always every single game almost fearful to look stupid. And so, now when you have that great first year, you come in the second year and you kind of take your foot off the gas. And he's like, you can't do that. And that's why he thinks a lot of players do take that dip. And Quinn kind of had that too. We'll see what happens with Faber and Bedard. But Faber has a really good mentality about it. He thinks a lot of it is stats. And he just thinks that even if his stats come down, which again, if he's not on the top power play unit, it's probably going to invariably come down. That as long as you keep that out of your head, and as his standpoint realizes that there's so many other ways that he specifically can impact the game, he thinks that he's going to avoid the quote unquote sophomore slump. So obviously we'll see, but you and I both know him very well. He's an incredibly mature kid. He's built like a tank. And he's just got this great mentality about him. So I'm really not worried about him at all. I just think that we all, if his numbers come down based on the fact that he is getting now less ice time, because obviously if Spurgeon is healthy, you're now going to even out your first and second pair ice time. And then having Chisholm and Bogosian on your third pair, they're much better set than they were going into last season. You're going to lower the ice time. That's going to probably take away some of his offensive numbers. So as long as we all keep that out of our head and stop thinking that maybe he's having a worse year, I think that we're all be fine with him. But the one thing I'll tell you about Faber in Vegas, Joe, is man, was he in his element. And I joked on my podcast the other day with LaPanta that bad news for Faber, because probably every city he goes to this year, every NHL writer or broadcasters could be like, ask Sickman and Dylan and Jackson, hey, can I talk to Faber today? Because his personality just shone out there. He was so humbled to be there. First of all, amongst all these NHL stars, the Dreisaitl's, the Forsbergs, the McDavids, the Crosbys, and all that, to be part of that, I think he was super excited. And he talked about that. But everybody I talked to, not just the writers I was with, but the Elliot Friedmans, the Johnny Lazaruses, a lot of different people out there were all like, this guy came there and just was almost, inspiring the way that he dealt with them, talked to him, and how excited he was to be there. And, he wore his glasses and a lot of the pitch on ice stuff, mostly because he forgot his contacts, he said. But it was he just got into it. And I just think that says a lot about him, because, a lot of these players, they don't want to come. A lot of guys, let's be honest, Cole Perfetti was there for Winnipeg. Why? Probably because some guys in Winnipeg didn't want to go out there. I mean, some players just don't want to be there. And he just really embraced it.
Final question, brought to you as always by our good friends at Waggle Golf. First, make sure you head over to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10 to take 10% off your entire order. I know we already had you do a Waggle Golf Foursome with us before, but we'll pivot it and say, give us the 4 players, so not storylines necessarily, but players you're most interested in following going into the first day of training camp.
I mean, a lot of it, not to keep on returning to Joe's story today, but I really do want to see some of these. I mean, I want to see some of these guys that struggled last year, or didn't have the greatest years. I know Joe's doing a big story on Ryan Hartman next week. I think it's probably a little overblown how we keep on lumping him in as like a bad season. He still had 21 goals on a team that didn't score a ton. But I want to see how he looks. I want to see how Foligno looks. I want to see how Spurgeon looks. I want to see how Freddie Gaudreau looks. Is Freddie going to be able to handle this, potential bounce back year if he's fourth line right wing? How's he going to produce? Where's Marcus Johansson in this lineup? And then, from the next step, the next tier, I want to see Huznadinov and Ohgren show that they are studs. We just saw him for little sample sizes last year. I'm really excited about Ohgren. And my hope as a beat writer is we get to see Ohgren get that real elevated role in the lineup this year. potentially on that second line. Marco Rossi's another one. Like if it is Hartman on top line and Eriksson Ek on the second line, Rossi is going to be your quote unquote checking line center. And again, how's he going to handle that? So it'll be fascinating to watch.
You mentioned Freddie, like, does he handle a fourth line role? Like, where's Marcus Johansson go? Like, if you end up putting ohgren a second line, and the third line is Foligno, obviously, and then Marco Rossi, your third line winger might be is either Trennan or Johansson, probably, or Trennan's on the fourth line. So, like, I mean, he's a guy, I think, obviously, if he has a contract year, like he's had contract years in his past, like, he'll be really good. But, like, I guess how would you handle him in camp, or would you give ohgren a chance to get that spot, or do you let him as a veteran player get that spot and let's see if he keeps on to it?
Well, as John said to you, like, I think they're going to experiment with a lot of things. So the one thing I caution Wild fans is that when we're tweeting out the lines in this camp, calm down, man. Like, I can't handle it if you just go freaking crazy on a instant, like, this is the lines today. But if I had to guess, I think John starts with Johansson on line 2, because I also think that you don't want to immediately on a veteran just have him dejected on day one and be like, why am I on the fourth line? Let ohgren work his way up. He is still a young kid that has to prove himself. He scored against San Jose last year. Good for you. It's still San Jose. You gotta elevate, and there's going to be times where ohgren's going to get that chance, and that's going to be the really interesting part of camp. But I think that if I was the coach, and maybe this is just the guy that's been around for as long as I have, and know how coaches think, I think you start with the veteran in that really top spot, and then you let the young guys sort of work their way up. I know fans don't love to hear that. They just want Rossi on line 1. They want ohgren on line 2. They want boldy, Eriksson, that type of stuff. But my gut says is that to keep, to your point, Johansson's mentality in a good space, I think you start him there, and then you work it in camp and see who slots well with who.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, like it's you have some stories coming up on Spurgeon, which will be the day after this podcast comes out on Wednesday, and I have Hartman coming up, and you'll be at camp, obviously covering everything going on for us at the Athletic. But you have a show coming up too, don't you? You have a live podcast.
Right? Thursday at Tuttle's at 7 p.m. LaPanta and I are going to be out there with Stefan Veyu, who I just wrote about in the Athletic. It's going to be 2 days. Actually, today I should actually check in with Veyu to see how his he was getting his big CT scan today to see how the halo on his head was working, and essentially if there was bone growth in the C1 vertebrae that he broke, and if not, he's going to probably be in that halo for many more months, because they're going to want to try to do at all costs avoid surgery that would immobilize his neck. But he'll be out there in a couple days. 7 p.m. at Tuttle's, LaPanta and me. It's called Worst Seats in the House on the Talk North. And then, as you said, I got a ton of stuff coming out Thursday. I got a really cool NHL player poll coming out in the Athletic, where I talked to all the guys in Prague and all the guys in Vegas for this player poll. That's always fun. And then I got the Jared Spurgeon story. I'm also writing a Thomas Hertl story for Thursday as well. His first full season with the Vegas Golden Knights. So I'll be doing a lot of national stuff too, as well as the Wild.
Awesome. Well, appreciate having you on this week of training camp. We'll get busy for everyone, especially you. So thanks again, and we'll do this again maybe next month or something.
Yep. See you, Joe. See you, Scott.
Thanks again, Russo, for jumping on. I know he'll kind of make spot appearances throughout the season here, but always appreciate his time. And I know you guys had to get out of here quick and run out to that Heinz availability, which trademarking this now in case anyone else thinks of it, but we said hindsight a couple of times there, and we got to come up with some kind of segment called hindsight.
That's a great one. Hindsight 2020. Yeah. Hindsight something. Yeah. I think it'd be great. We could get a pretty good sponsor for that one. I'm sure it'd be kind of cool. He would dig that one. As a coach, everybody goes in hindsight, right? It was great having Mike on. We have a lot of great stories working together coming up. He'll be doing a lion's share of the work to start the season with me, still a little bit on paternity leave, but a lot of great things we have coming in with the Athletic. And like he mentioned in interview, Jared Spurgeon story behind the scenes of his injury and recovery and all that stuff coming Thursday. Ryan Hartman story coming on Monday. We'll be doing some bigger picture Wild stories as camp gets going, and pretty much anybody you want to read about the Wild will be covered. in camp. If you missed it, I did the 3 goalie rotation breakdown kind of analysis story, talking to former goalies who played into their 40s, like Ryan Miller, Craig Anderson, Dwayne Rolson, and guys who played in 3 goalie systems to see what the heck will be like for the Jesper Wallstedt and marc-andre Fleury and Philip Gustafson. So yeah, a lot more to come on the Athletic as we go along. A lot to come on this podcast. Some exciting guests we have in store for you guys, starting even in September and October.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, we got into Besser. Faber. Wow. Faber, not Brock Boeser. We got into Faber. We got into Spurgeon, power play quarterback, talked about the 3 goalie rotation, a little bit of prospect stuff. Anything glaring for you? Like, what's the big thing that we didn't talk about with Russo that is your main focal point, whether it's going into training camp or going into week 1 of the season?
Yeah, well, I was going to have you break down a little bit the prospect showcase. People asked about the prospect showcase because I wanted to get your thoughts on who stood out for you. And I have my own take on what we didn't cover so far as well after that.
Sure. Yeah. So for the Tom Curver's prospect showcase, did only watch spotting times in the first game against the Chicago Blackhawks because, the whole parent thing. But what really stood out to me wasn't as much on the score sheet, because I don't think there was anyone that was notedly oh my gosh, game changer or didn't deliver. But the one that won't go noticed because of the score sheet is Hunter Haight. Guy is going to be a lunatic. I'm so excited to see him full season. Well, maybe not full if he works his way up, but full season, at least pro, where he's going to be with the Iowa Wild. You could potentially have a pretty fun line with him, Bankier, maybe even Ohgren, if, everything that Russo talked about in the previous segment comes to fruition with just not having cap space to bring him up because of the goaltending. But he's a guy that is just all over the ice, buzzing, does not stop. I'm excited to see what he can do in a full season up. Certainly Haight played fine. I would have maybe liked to see a little bit more, just being the setting of the types of players he's going up against here. I would have liked to see him make a little bit more of a mark so that going into training camp here, he's got a little bit more going on as he comes up against the big boys. Bankier, always solid. I don't think I've ever watched a game where I was worried about what Caden Bankier was doing. Blue line across the board. Again, no one stood out over the top. I do have to give a little bit of a nod to our producer here, Isha Jerome, who has been very interested in Stevie Leskovar since drafting him. And tell you what, guy's a buzzsaw. He's out there and he's looking to take heads off, and he's not being dumb about it either. He's not just running around reckless and just trying to hurt people. He's picking his spots, and I don't know. I loved the step up there on Colton Dock. I enjoyed that, but nothing crazy. I was kind of hoping I was going to see some guys pop and see some guys that maybe, okay, whoa, we need to rethink. It was pretty status quo in that game, other than Haight really being all over the place and just Bankier reaffirming anything that I already thought of him.
Yeah, I think Bankier's a guy I really want to watch this year because he came off a pretty serious injury and came back pretty fast from it last fall, and he hit the ground running. He shot out of a cannon, like Brett McLean told me. And so to have a full season, healthy, a guy they're really high on, a guy, really smart player. He can play, he can create offensively. He's good, responsible defensively. And I think he's one of those guys that has an NHL future. It's just more so of getting more time at the pro level, at the AHL level. But you're right. He does a lot of things right, which you won't see a lot of bad games from him, which is what you want to have consistency to be able to play at the next level. So he's one of those guys we had in the podcast, I think back in March or April. I think we had him on there. Really interesting dude too. So looking forward to seeing some of these guys in training camp too. They'll get a chance with the big guys, at least for the first few weeks before Iowa breaks for their camp.
Yeah, no, absolutely love it. Do you have a last thought then? Is there one thing that's sitting there tip of the tongue that's God, I'm just excited for this part of the season being underway with the Wild?
Well, I mean, I think it's time for all the talk to turn to action, right? I think a lot of the guys are saying the right things. And even Hartman told me the other day, it's it's less about talking, more about going and doing it. the focus from last season, besides all the injuries and everything else, was the fact that they weren't as mentally tough as they needed to be. They weren't resilient. They let things get to them. One loss turned into 3. They weren't as tough. They weren't quote unquote soft, but they were as hard to, I guess Yakov Trenin said they were soft, but they weren't that team that they've been in previous years. And in order to compete in this division, they're going to have to be one of those teams that people go into the X and are like, this is a ridiculously hard game. I couldn't believe it. They're not going to outscore teams. They're not going to be out more flashy than other teams. They're not to be, play responsible, fundamental, and just be pain in the ass, right? And you have some guys who can score like Boldy and Kaprizov, but a lot of things that hurt them last year was that they just weren't mentally as tough as they needed to be. So that's a big focus for John Hines and the group in creating that culture and that kind of team mindset going into the year, knowing that they have 7 of the first 9 on the road, playing a division that got better, and people are probably counting them out because of what they saw last season. So kind of ready to see what happens starting game 1.
I think all the fans are just as ready as we are. It's here, guys. You made it. Training camp underway tomorrow as you listen here on Wednesday. Anyone that's new to Fellowship of the Rink and enjoyed the episode, please, hit subscribe, leave a 5-star review if you're so inclined. Video's more your thing. Definitely subscribe to the Soda Pod YouTube channel. Full podcast recordings, clips from these great interviews, prospect highlights, you name it. But as always, we really do appreciate you guys for tuning in yet again to Fellowship of the Rink. You stay classy, stay to hockey.